Good morning, everyone. Won't you stand with me? My name is Tyler. I'm so grateful that you're here today. We just want to celebrate Jesus with you. Let's lift his name high together. Are you ready? Trust him today. Let's lift him high. Yeah. Yeah. We lift our banner high. We lift the name of Jesus from age to age to age. Your kingdom has no end. We lift our banner high. We lift the name of Jesus. From age to age to age, your kingdom has no end. You are the only king forever. Sing. Forevermore, you are victorious. You are the only king forever. Almighty God, we lift you higher. You are the only king forever. Forevermore, you are victorious. And you are my life, you are my love, you are my reason. You are my hope, you are my joy, you are my passion, my all in all. Jesus, my all in all, my all in all. Jesus, my all in all. Thank you, God. In my heart you reign forever. My all, my everything. You are my life, you are my love, you are my reason. You are my hope, you are my joy, you are my passion, my all in all. Jesus, my all in all. My all in all. Jesus, my all in all. The tempest, you're the shelter, and I will hide beneath your wings. Help us remember. And hallelujah, what a Savior. My all, my everything. You are my life, you are my love, you are my reason. You are my hope, you are my joy, you are my passion, my all in all. Jesus, my all in all. My all in all. Jesus, my all in all. Your name be high and lifted up. We say, Jesus, your name be high and lifted up. Oh, your name be high, lifted up in all the earth, in all the You are my life, you are my love, you are my reason. You are my hope, you are my joy, you are my passion, my all in all. Jesus, my all in all. My all in all. Jesus, my all in all. My Grateful today that I can trust his name and treasure of greatest price and healer. He's giving me life, faithful again and again. Jesus, your love never ends. He's sovereign and sovereign in all that you do, and refuge. My hope is in you, and mighty, yes, your enemies fall. Oh Jesus, you reign over all. Yeah, it's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you bearing my cross. Oh, we sing worthy, you're the Lamb who was slain. Oh, Jesus, great is your name. It's who you are, it's who you are, it's who you'll always be. It's who you are, it's who you are, it's who you'll always be. Jesus, 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 yesterday, today, forever, you're the same. Everlasting, never failing. Yesterday, today, forever, you're the same. Yesterday, today, forever, you're the same. Oh, it's who you are, it's who you are, it's who you'll always be. Yeah. It's who you are, it's who you are, it's who you'll always be. We know it's who you'll always be. We know that it's who you'll always be. Amen. It's beautiful. Let's pray. Lord, we love you today, and we grateful for these truths that we can sing, that we can talk about together. I thank you for this moment of gathering. And Holy Spirit, would you just move in a special way today as we look into your word and we are together. I pray that you would let us see opportunities to encourage one another today. And I just pray that today would be the day of salvation for any of those at the sound of my voice that don't know you. Jesus, we're grateful that you come after us, that you chase us every day. Your goodness and mercy comes after us every day, and we're grateful. Thank you for these moments, and may we just remember the work that you're doing in our lives and you're doing in this place and in the Permian Basin and the world. We give you this day in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, you can have a seat.
Hey, good morning, Stonegate. Personal welcome, thank you. Hey, we also want to welcome our North Campus here in Midland, and for those of you over in Odessa at Bottom Junior High this morning, we want to welcome you as well. Just a few more months in Bottom Junior High. We'll talk a little bit more about that here in a moment. Hey, it's first Sunday of the month, so that means it's Elements time. So tonight at 6 o'clock in this room right here on the Midland campus, we will have Elements service. If you're not familiar with what that is, that's our baby dedication, baptism, communion, and worship night. It's kind of a family night we do the first Sunday of each month. Then I'll have an exclusion to that because in June we will not do Elements, and in July we will not have Elements. So this is your last chance for a few months to come celebrate Elements service together. So I hope you'll make the time tonight on your schedule, 6 o'clock, to be here in this room and do that. And let's celebrate that evening together. As I mentioned in Odessa, we're going to have them in Bottom for about 3 more months. Our build update for this weekend is really getting exciting. We've got some video we want to show you of the building and let you see kind of some transition. Yeah, so total makeover of what's going on over there. You can continue to kind of watch that. I'll fill you in on a little bit of information while you're seeing that, but you'll see the whole front is totally transformed now, has a new look. We're going to take you through the building where you can kind of see into the foyer and into the auditorium, that new auditorium. It was being painted up, the ceilings were being painted black this past weekend when it was happening, so it's a little bit of a mess, but this is real construction happening, so it's part of that deal. We're really excited about how this is taking shape, how it's coming along. If you're driving between Midland and Odessa and you're on 191, I hope that you can take a look as you go over that overpass and be able to glance over quickly, safely, glance over and see the building. It really is, it makes quite an impression over there. We're really excited about it and excited to get in. So they should be in that building at the end of July. So we've just under 3 months now. Construction with the general contractor will be done in 2 months, and then we'll take a few weeks after that to finish up furniture and get all the AV systems installed and ready to go. So we're almost there. We're in the home stretch. One of the reasons I want to talk to you this weekend about that as well is because in June, we will be at camp the first weekend in June. So we won't do an update for build most likely. And as we talked about not having elements, so there's a number of things that are going to kind of, the next time we talk and I'm out here talking to you, we will probably be right on the edge of being in that building. So where we are financially with that is we're about $1.4 million short of having the project paid for. We have $260,000 in the bank right now waiting that next invoice. And that probably will not cover the next invoice that comes next week. So we're getting on that cusp of having to dip into maybe the line of credit. We're trying not to do that. We really don't want to do that. So here's what we're asking you to do, just to continue to give toward this project, continue to help us stay ahead of the construction bills and hopefully not use that line of credit. But also as you approach the summer, you can go online and you can set up that giving to happen automatically. I know sometimes as you travel, if it's not something that you do as an automatic thing online, I want you to know that's available to you. And if you need help for that and information on getting that set up, we'd be happy to talk to you out front at the information desk or over in Stone Mart. Those ladies can help you as well get that set up. So we're in the final stretch. We just need a little bit more to go. We'll be in that building toward the end of July, and I just want to encourage you to continue to just give to it. We're in the last, so we've got 81% covered. We're in the last 19% of the cost of this thing, and we'll have it done, and we'll be ready to move on to the next great things that God's put in front of us. Thanks for giving to the project, and thanks for being a part of it, and we look forward to what's coming down the road. And turn it over to Patrick for you.
Thanks, David. Well, it's good to be with you live this week. If you were here last week, you got to watch the somewhat crazy video of me trying to preach last week. So I want to tell you a couple of stories, but in the meantime, why don't you try to find your way to the book of Ezra in the Old Testament, small kind of book, and the next door neighbor to Ezra, which is Nehemiah. We'll be in Ezra and Nehemiah for the next few weeks, for the rest of May, as we begin to press into some lessons from this story in Ezra and Nehemiah that might help us as we as a church move into the next venture of Odessa and whatever else God might have for us in relationship to what he's doing around here. And so again, welcome to Odessa as well as our North Campus. And it's an exciting time. But as you're finding Ezra and Nehemiah, another word about camp, as signups are over and we're kind of gearing up for what's happening, I wanted to give you a numbers update because we as a fellowship have been able to basically set another year of records with camp. We have 1,182 students going to youth camp, and that is, one person's excited about it, so I'm glad. That's a record. We've never sent that many. We have 352 third and fourth graders going to kids camp, and there's a waiting list for that. And then another number that's just sort of amazing is over 500 servant leaders who will be serving in those camps as well. Let me just give you that's a great thing to, and this one is really a shout out to all of you that over $100,000 in scholarships were awarded to campers, and so thank you for your sacrificial giving in that regard. The one thing I would urge you to do is on June the 4th, I guess that's the day we leave for camp, if you were planning travel between here and Santa Fe, I would suggest you travel early or late because you do not want to get behind 25 buses that will be leaving for that trip. But it's going to be an amazing time, I can assure you, and there's no time or reason to go into the details this morning, but I can assure you the enemy has been working exhaustively to cause us to not have camp. I'll put it at that. The enemy has been on us hard to ruin it, and so we must be getting ready for an incredible week, both here and with the kids' camp. I hope you're still finding Ezra and Nehemiah, or you have found it. I just want to tell you one more story that relates to camp, and it relates to where I was that I can tell you about now. I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to tell you about it or not. But what happened was last Saturday night, I received a text message inviting me and I think it was 8 or 9 other evangelical leaders from around the country and one from another part of the world to attend a meeting with President of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas. And if you saw this week, he had a meeting and a press conference with President Trump. And so part of that was about this religious freedom, religious liberty for the Palestinians and West Bank, Gaza, things you hear in the news. And so a group of us from around the country were asked to sit with him and meet and discuss religious liberty, religious freedom before this meeting with President Trump. And so it was kind of a whirlwind deal and getting that all figured out. But anyways, so I was leaving here. As soon as I got finished with the 9 o'clock service, I was leaving to get packed and to drive to Dallas so I could catch a flight Monday morning. And because apparently in Midland, we think we need to charge the most expensive possible amount of money for a flight. So we have to drive to Dallas to get a cheaper flight because my plane wasn't working. And so anyways, I don't have one. And so like, nervous laughter, haha. So that's why we don't have the building paid. No, anyways, so the way these things work, I'm sure all of you have been to these meetings with world leaders. You show up at the hotel where they are typically, and you kind of get there early, and you're in this holding area. We were in like this little dining room, waiting for his people to come down and get you, and then rush you upstairs and have your meeting and all that kind of stuff. So the crazy part, and you say, how does this relate to camp? Are you stretching this thing? No, I just want you to. So I'm sitting in the dining room, and the leaders are showing up, and everybody's shaking hands and getting to know each other. And some of them know each other. I only knew a few of the people in the room. And this one guy walks in, and when I looked at him, he looked a little familiar. And I thought, I know that guy from somewhere. I know that face. And then he said his name, and his name was Jay Strack. And some of you have probably heard Jay Strack preach. He's a I don't want to say this in a way that makes you think, he's an old evangelist. He's been around for a long time. He was a street kid and, got saved and all this kind of stuff. And the reason that's important is because the first time I heard him speak was when I was a kid at youth camp. And he began to challenge me at youth camp about what it meant to have your life surrendered to the Lord Jesus. And so I walked over to him. I said, you don't know me from Adam. But I said, I'll bet you remember preaching in Siloam Springs, Arkansas. He said, at Faith Week? And I said, yes. And I said, with the pastor I grew up with, Tom Elliff. He goes, I was just with him last week. And I said, I just want you to know I'm here because of people like you speaking into my life. And so the reason I tell you that is because what's about to happen. And also what I'm about to share with you this morning about the magnitude of God being at work in and around us. And you never really know what's happening or who you're going to get to meet or who God's going to put you in the company of that's going to change a trajectory. Because the reality is I'm probably speaking to young people over camp, and Dustin will be speaking to young people that, in Jay Strack's case, I got to shake hands with him and he got to meet me, and I've met with 3 world leaders of 3 different countries on this globe, but somebody had to speak that into my life. And so I want you to understand the magnitude of what you do, whether it's changing diapers, whether it's being a bus captain, whether it's greeting somebody as they come in, whether it's being a smiling face that helps them to know that a transformed life through Jesus Christ is real. And I hope you'll begin to understand the magnitude of that as we kind of press through this. So I trust you have found Ezra and Nehemiah. I have not, so give me a chance to get there. And Ezra and Nehemiah they were probably one book at one time, and then they were split over the years, but they basically cover the same time period of when the Jewish people who were already in exile in Babylon were returning back to their home. And they're returning back, and they're going to rebuild, basically to simplify it, rebuild their home. And so Ezra and Nehemiah, Ezra was what you would call, some would say a priest, some would say a scribe, just someone learned in the scriptures and a writer and maybe a spiritual leader. Nehemiah was a cupbearer, which what that meant was he was a slave who had to stand in front of or with the king. And every time somebody brought the king his drink, his wine, or whatever, his job, as you probably know this, you probably already know this, his job was to drink it and make sure it wasn't poisonous. And then, you know kind of how that works. If he dies, it probably wasn't good. And if he lives, go ahead and finish it. So life or death job. And that's who these two guys are, but they're involved in something very historic in the work of God. And so we're not going to cover chapter by chapter, obviously. I'm only going to spend about 3 weeks here, but I want to cover some of the high ground of points that we might work into our lives and our church as we press into this issue of multiple campuses, and even more personally, as you press into what God's doing in your life, where you live and how you're living, okay? So let's go to Ezra chapter 1, and I want to read quite a bit of scripture here in Ezra chapter 1, and then I'm going to jump over to Nehemiah chapters 1 and 2. We'll read, and then we'll let that be the foundation for the next few things we're going to talk about. So in Ezra chapter 1, let's just read verse 1. In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia. Now you've probably heard of Nebuchadnezzar, who was involved in the overrun of Judah or Israel, but now he's been conquered, and Cyrus, king of Persia, is running the show. In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled. It's important that you understand that phrase is helping us to remember something that'll come up later today, which is God has been at work, is at work, and is always at work. And he speaks, and when he speaks, it stays. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. He stays true to his word. And that's what Ezra's trying to tell you, that God said this would happen, now it's coming to pass. The Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia. Very important for you to remember, Cyrus is not a Christian king, okay? I know you probably know that, and you're historically up to date on that, but Cyrus was not an evangelical, so to speak. He was a pagan king. The reason that's so important is for you to remember God works through pagan kings, and they're not going to stop what he's going to do. So the Lord had stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and he put it in writing. And thus says Cyrus, king of Persia. Now you need to understand something politically here. What we're about to read here is the way Cyrus sees what's happening. For Cyrus, what he wanted to do was help all the people that they had conquered have kind of their own religion. But he wasn't saying he agreed with it. He was just saying, okay, to you Jews, I'm going to let you have your home and you can worship your God. And then to other people, he was going to let them have their God. That's what's happening. But it's all being written so we understand God's hand in world events. So here we go, verse 2. Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord, the God of heaven, interesting how he perceives this, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth. And he has charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Whoever is among you of all of his people, so he's speaking to the Jewish people, may his God be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and rebuild the house of the Lord, the God of Israel. He is the God who is in Jerusalem. Now, when you read that, if your copy of the scriptures you have with you has the word Lord in all capital letters, back in that day and time, a Jewish person wouldn't even uttered that. It's what we would call the word Yahweh, okay? And so they would not even read that if it was a Jewish person reading the Jewish scriptures. In fact, it'd be read this way. If I was in verse 2 again, it'd say, the God of heaven, you see, for the reverence for that. But this is the king speaking. Verse 4, and let each survivor in whatever place he sojourns be assisted by the men of his place with silver and gold, with goods and with beasts, besides freewill offerings for the house of God that is in Jerusalem. Let me read verse 5. Then rose up the heads of the fathers' houses of Judah and Benjamin, and the priests and the Levites, everyone whose spirit God had stirred up from the inside out thing, to go up to rebuild the house of the Lord that is in Jerusalem. Now, turn over to Nehemiah chapter 1. Nehemiah chapter 1. And let's read there, Nehemiah chapter 1. Now, understanding when you say something like Ezra and Nehemiah are contemporaries, we're talking in decades oftentimes. So understand a lot of time has lapses in these two books. Verse 1 of Nehemiah chapter 1. So the words of Nehemiah, the son of Hakaliah, now it happened in the month of Kislev in the 20th year, as I was in Susa, the capital, that Hanani, one of my brothers, came with certain men from Judah. So people had been there, now they'd come back to him. And I asked them, basically it would read this way, I asked them how the Jews were doing who had escaped and who were surviving the exile in Jerusalem. And this was the report, verse 3. The remnant there in the province who had survived the exile, they're in great trouble and shame. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down and its gates are destroyed by fire. Now I'm not going to take the time to read a lot of verses, but I'm going to have you skip down all the way to verse 11, because what happens is when Nehemiah hears this, it creates a burden in him. We'll talk about that here in just a moment. And he begins to place that burden before the Lord in prayer. So look with me at verse 11. O Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant and to the prayer of your servants who delight to fear your name, and give success to your servant today, and grant him mercy in the sight of this man. Now, he's referring to King Artaxerxes, and then you see this little thing that says, I was the cupbearer to the king. Now, what we're about to read is why he's asking for mercy, because he's about to do two life-threatening things. Number one, he's going to go drink the cup before the king. So he never knew if he was going to live or die when he took a drink. Okay, so he's got to live that one first. And then the next thing he's going to do is he's going to ask the king, if given the opportunity, for a favor. And you must understand, in that day and time, if you ask the king, if he tells you something, if he tells you to speak to him, if you irritate him or you otherwise cross him in any way, shape, or form, he's not going to just dismiss you. He's going to literally dismiss you. You understand the difference? He's going to kill you. Okay, so he's praying for mercy for about what's about to happen. So chapter 2, verse 1. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was before him, I took up the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had not been sad in his presence. So he survived the first thing. He takes the drink, apparently it's fine, all's good. But his countenance is different. Now, and you can tell there's a relationship here. And the king says to him, why is your face so sad? Are you not sick? So he's seeing his countenance, and they've seen each other for so long. Apparently, the wine has been good for a long time. Then he says, is nothing but sadness of the heart. You can't look this way. He's saying, Nehemiah, you don't look this. The only reason you look this way is because something's really deeply disturbing you. And then look what Nehemiah says in the end of verse 2. I was very much afraid. So God opens the door, and he's still terrified. He's like, oh, okay, here we go. And here he goes. So I said to the king, oh, let the king live forever. Long live the king. That's what that is. Why should not my face be sad when the city, the place of my father's graves, lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire? Now, he's speaking about a colony now of the king. And then the king said to me, what are you asking? What do you want, Nehemiah? And then listen to the little things Nehemiah is telling you. He says, so I prayed to the God of heaven. He's given you a little glimpse into what's happening in his inner being while he's standing in front of the king. He's terrified, and the king says, what's up? And he's like, oh no. And then the king says, you can't be sad. There's got to be something going on in your heart. And he says, oh, king. And then he tells us, and I'm praying while I'm talking. That's what's going on here. Verse 5. I said to the king, well, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, that you send me to Judah, to the city of my father's graves, that I can rebuild it. Now, up to this moment and throughout, we will never know anything more about Nehemiah than that he is a professional wine taster. There is nothing that tells us that he's qualified to go rebuild the city. It's very important you remember that when you start thinking about what God might be doing in your life and through your life. Verse 6, the king said to me, and again, another editorial comment, and the queen was sitting right there next to him. How long will you be gone, and when are you going to come back? And so it pleased the king to send me when I had given him a time frame. And I said to the king, so now he's gotten a little bold, you know. It's kind of like, all right, I want to ask for the keys too. If it pleases the king, let letters be given to me, to the governors of the province beyond the river, that they can let me pass through until I come to Judah. He's basically asking for safe passage and to be covered under the king's authority. And a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he would give me the timber to make the beams for the gates of the fortress of the temple. Now he's asking the king to pay for it. I mean, he went from scared to, I'm going to ask for the farm. And he keeps going. And for the wall of the city and for the house that I should occupy. And the king granted me what I asked. Watch this. For the good hand of God was upon me. Now, all I want to do this morning is draw out 4 corporate and personal applications for you and I about what we see in these first 2 chapters and what God does with Ezra and Nehemiah, with an understanding that, as we have often said, there are no neutral moments in life, but also remembering that there's no such thing as a neutral life. And I'm going to try to say this many different ways throughout the morning, but it's critical that you understand, as we've said thousands and thousands of times, your life is not neutral, your life is not meaningless, and your life is meant to connect to the generations past, and in ways you may never see, generations to come. It's critical that even if you think I'm trying to motivate you, I'm not. My concern is not to motivate you to walk out of here and go, I am important. My hope is to help you to see the truth of how critical your life is in the work of the plan of God. Ezra and Nehemiah would have never thought that God was calling them out to make a generational difference. But through some of the things we'll look at here this morning, they were ready to do that. And I want you to begin to ask yourself, am I listening? Am I paying attention to what God's doing around me and then inside of me so that I can join him in what he's doing? And I'll try to give you some examples to stir your thoughts here in just a minute. So here's the first thing, just 4 simple things I want you to see from what we've read this morning. And here's the first one. When it seems impossible to us, God is at work. This is just the first thing for you to think about. When it seems impossible to us, God is at work. You might even say it this way. When it seems impossible to us, God is still at work, if that helps you. And when it seems impossible to us, God keeps working. So when you look at Ezra and Nehemiah, they have been in captivity for decades. They have heard the promise of a man named Jeremiah who told the Israelites to make homes in captivity and to make a livelihood in captivity and to bless the place of their captivity. In fact, the temptation for them would be to think God may not do anything, when the reality is God is working both past, present, and future, and we must understand that God is not moving us to a place of independence, but he is always moving us to a station of dependence where he does his work through us and invites us to join him. I hope you didn't miss what I just said about independence and dependence. God is consistently orchestrating things in our lives to bring us to a place to trust him. If he is not bringing us to a place to trust him, then our default is to trust who? Self. And so what's happening with Ezra and Nehemiah is you don't see him saying, okay, you guys, you're it, you're the people. You see Ezra and Nehemiah going, okay, it seems impossible, but I'll be a part of what God's doing. Let me try to squeeze it in and make it a little more personal. And I just wrote some notes here. In the realm of impossibility, where you might think God is no longer at work, how about some personal issues? And this is the way I wrote it. Is there a person or a circumstance that you've lost hope in or you've given up on? Is there a person or a circumstance, a situation you've lost hope in or you've given up on? It might be something from a long time ago you've given up on. It might be something that just happened this week. It might be something you're anticipating. But have you begun to just think, I don't really think God's working in this thing anymore. I don't think God really cares about this. Have you given up on restoration? Have you given up on reconciliation? Have you given up on God changing your heart to forgive? Have you given up on God's ability to rescue you from addiction or depression or another illness that's besetting you? or to give you life and hope through cancer or another disease. You see, throughout the scriptures, you never see God specializing in what's possible. You always see him specializing in what's impossible for his glory, the good of others, and our ultimate joy. And in Ezra and Nehemiah, and you translate that to a church where God's pressing us to try new things and do new things with the church and this whole multi-site thing and a leadership vision and different things. When it seems impossible, God's at work. When it seems impossible that God could be doing anything in the world, to realize that God's at work. When peace seems impossible, God's at work. Just don't let that leave your thought process that the moment something becomes impossible, what should be above that situation is a glaring sign that says, God at work. Every situation you face, every time God allows, and I'll say it this way, the circumstances of your life to run up against impossibility, then there's a neon sign that says opportunity, God's at work. Don't miss that. Every time you've run you've got nothing left. You've run all the traps. You've gone to all the banks. You've talked to all the investors. You've talked to all your friends. And it keeps impossible, impossible, impossible. The reason that might be in front of you so glaringly is because the Lord's trying to show you, you haven't trusted me yet. So I'm reminding you, when it seems impossible to you, God is at work. Now let's go to the next thing, because these all build on each other, okay? So the next thing that's going to come up on the screen for you out of Ezra and Nehemiah is this observation. Impossible burdens seem to be the breeding ground of God moments. Impossible burdens seem to be the breeding ground of God moments. Now, that's a real sort of, the word burden can sometimes be a churchy word or a word that we don't have a definition for. So I wrote my own definition for burden, and I'm just going to read it to you. It won't come up on the screen. But we see this happening with Ezra and Nehemiah. This burden comes over them for what's happening, let's say it this way, in their hometown, what's happening to their people. Because remember, God's at work. And when God begins to work his work, typically he births, I'm not trying to be so alliterative here, he births a burden in somebody's heart about it. So let me give you a definition of a burden. I'll read it a couple of times. A burden is an unrelenting desire, concern, passion, or direction for action. Let me read it again. A burden is an unrelenting desire, concern, passion, or direction for action. I'll read it again. An unrelenting desire, concern, passion, or direction for action. Impossible burdens seem to be the breeding ground of God moments. Ezra and Nehemiah could not shake something needed to be done. And Ezra and Nehemiah, neither one said, I seem to be completely capable of doing this. They just couldn't shake it. Nehemiah was terrified to go talk to the king. Ezra, what in the world's going on? Am I supposed to be a part of this? But God just keeps pressing it in on them. Question: what is the unrelenting desire, concern, passion, or direction for action God keeps pressing into your soul? I wrote some of these things down. Does a new business idea keep pressing in on you? Because I hope you begin to realize all of this is not just church stuff. This is the stuff that happens outside the doors. So is it an unrelenting thing that keeps happening in your soul about a way you're supposed to do business, or a business you're supposed to start, or a business you're supposed to sell or invest in or do? What is it that just keeps pressing in and pressing in and pressing in, and it's well beyond revenue and profit? It's different. What some other things? Is there a relationship? There's this unrelenting concern, passion, or direction for action in a relationship, whether it's forgiveness, reconciliation, whatever it might be, that God keeps pressing in. Maybe you're a young couple and God's pressing into you saying it's time to commit. Maybe you're a young person and the Lord's pressing into you, it's time to grow up. Maybe you're an older person and what the Lord keeps pressing into you is stop dropping out, keep engaging. seeing that the word retiring from life and work is not in the Bible. Maybe that's something God's pressing into. Unrelenting desires, concerns, passions, or directions for action. Is there a risk? You remember last week when I was talking about these talents and these different things, and they went ahead and just risked it. An unrelenting passion for action. Now, what do you do if you have this unrelenting passion and desire for action? Well, one simple thing I would tell you to do, really two things. I would encourage you to begin journaling or writing down what it is you're wrestling with in your soul as you're reading through the scriptures and as you're praying. The second thing I would encourage you to do is to begin relationships where you can share these things. Don't go, sit at Starbucks and just start talking to people about your unrelenting passion, okay? And don't sit down in your comm group. If you have a group that you're meeting with that's affiliated with our fellowship, don't sit down with a group of 25 and say, I got to share this with you. Jesus went from 12 to 11 and finally 3 and 1 at the cross. But it's important you find your 3 and you say, I got to bounce this off of you. I got to talk to you about this. I can't shake this. So already we've learned that God's always at work in the impossible. And when he's at work in the impossible, because there's no neutral moments, he's pressing in to burden you. You do understand that if God's going to do anything, he always does it through his people. So he's going to burden you. He's going to press into you. And then you're going to have to wrestle with that in the confrontation of the reality that that's impossible. And then let God keep pressing into this issue as he presses you into a moment where you've never seen God at work, but now you're going to see him at work. Here's the third thing. Nothing will stand in the way of what God is going to do. Nothing will stand in the way of what God's going to do. Now, the reason I put that in front of you is because it's very important in today's world that we understand, regardless of who's in charge of the different kingdoms of the world, God's in charge of the different kingdoms of the world. It's very hard to reconcile. I understand that. That's a tension. But that's why in the scriptures, we see the scriptures deliberately telling us that God stirred the hearts of pagan kings. And it's incumbent upon you and I to feel that tension and begin to pray that God release his work on the lives and hearts of what we might call pagan rulers and leaders. Because oftentimes what we do is we pray for God to destroy our enemies rather than for God to change our enemies. Because God is at work and nothing's going to stop what he's going to do. Now for you and I, let's make that a little more personal. The worldwide scene, you might think, this doesn't even matter to me. But on the personal level, and I've said this before, I think I've been here long enough that all I do is repeat myself. But the only person in the universe who believes that God can do above and beyond what you could ever hope or imagine, more than God, or as much as God, the only person who believes that God can do in you more than you could ever hope or imagine is Satan. From eternity, he has known what God can do in people's lives. And so what he does, from the moment you are graced with breathing your first until the moment you breathe your last, he is intent on sowing in your heart the doubt that God wants to use you. He will spend every moment to press into you some person or something for you to doubt yourself. He will press into you some person or something to get you to believe you're insignificant, to get you to believe that your solitary life doesn't touch anyone or mean anything. Because if he can continue to sow that into your life and you begin to believe, I'm just taking up space, then you begin to be a person who stands in the way of the body of Christ being everything it's been designed, called, and gifted to be, as 1 Corinthians 12 and Romans 12 and Ephesians 4 tells us. You see, nothing's going to stand in the way of what God's going to do, but the enemy's going to do everything he can to keep you from enjoying the joy of being a part of what God's going to do. There's a pretty good chance that most of you are never going to sit in the Oval Office or sit across from kings of the world. But there's a really good chance that you're going to sit across from somebody who might touch someone's life, who might touch someone's life, who might touch someone's life, because you're 4 people removed from anybody in the world, and that person 4 people later changes a world. And folks, Again, that is not a Zig Ziglar moment. This is not a motivational speech. This is a biblical admonition to you to understand there is no neutrality to your life or moments or the impossible moments with God. And they matter no matter where you are. I'll tell you a story and then we'll go to the last point. So this whole trip last week, crazy stuff, having to get reservations and all that kind of stuff. And sometimes we just need to be reminded that there's no neutral moments. So I don't know if you've ever been to DC. I mean, it's terrible, and unless you're going to see all of the stuff, the monuments and all that. But if you have to go, talk to, political people, you just sort of go, God, really? And so everything's expensive, okay? Ridiculous expensive. And where you have to stay to get to the meetings you have to get to. So I make a reservation at a place I would never make a reservation, and I didn't want to tell you what it is. And so I leave here as soon as I get finished doing whatever I did last Sunday up here, and I'm driving to Dallas, and I'm checking into a hotel. I got to go to Love Airport. I'm already ticked off because I got a B boarding pass on Southwest Airlines, and so, I'm like, what? Which means I'm probably going to have to sit, and then the worst thing that could happen on a Southwest flight is when you walk up to the flight attendant, and you go, is this going to be a full flight? And they say, absolutely, every seat. You're like, oh, no. And so, Danny, I saw you over here. Is Danny over here somewhere? Yes, you know exactly what I'm talking about, don't you? And so, you sit down and you play all the tricks where you put everything in the seat in between you to make it like there's an invisible person there. And then you know what you do. You see people coming down the aisle, and you're like, oh, God, no, please. Okay, that's okay. No. Don't act like you don't, because every one of you do it. And if you've never done it, you do it. And this is a whole day to get to D.C., and so you're flying and all this kind of stuff. So finally I get to D.C. and I'm going to take the subway because I don't want to take a cab, and I take the subway and I get to the hotel. All day traveling, which means I'm in a great mood, right? And I'm the guy who says no neutral moments. You never know whose life you're going to touch, right? So I walk up to the hotel. I'm already going to pay too much for this hotel. And I walk up, and Mr. Payton, get all my cards out and all that kind of stuff. I'm already a rewards member at this particular place, all this kind of stuff, which means give me my free water, whatever. So, and then I go up and he goes, well, Mr. Payton, we have a room with 2 double beds. And I go, no, we don't. Mr. Payton reserved a room with a king bed, and so we need to fix that. And he's like, Mr. Payton, now I wasn't saying Mr. Payton, I was saying me, and I said, no, there's something wrong with your system. Well, no, right here. And I'm like, this isn't going to go well. And so I take my phone out and pull up my reservation. I said, can you read that and tell me what that's? So it's going south. And so eventually I win. And so I go upstairs, proud of myself, that I've just humiliated this Middle Eastern individual. So I call my wife. Wrong decision. And to share with her my victory. And she says, no, I'm not going to say that. So I share my victory, and she says, well, that's interesting. I sure hope God never sees to put you on a national stage so he could see you on TV and question the validity of everything you say related to the way you treated him at the counter. I was like, good night. So I was telling you, I think I said it last week, it's easy to preach, it's another thing to live it, right? And so I had to reconcile with Faisal. We're on a first-name basis now, okay? So for the reality that, you may think you're just checking into a hotel, but you might be touching a life that 100 years from now. So what if the guy at the desk, because I already know his nationality, and I already know where he's from, and now he sees me for the next couple of days as a part of a delegation meeting with people about religious freedom. And yet what if his life now touches someone who's connected to his family somewhere in the Middle East that's in all likelihood a Muslim family? And let me remind you, people in the oil and gas industry, which would be all of us, the Lord doesn't bring the world to the Permian Basin for neutral moments. So please understand, it's not just for preachers and politicians, but nothing stands in the way of what God's going to do, and be aware of where he might place you for those moments. And those moments can be here, in that kids' building, at camp, as you walk out the door, and as you go to work tomorrow, or whoever you talk to. Last thing, resources and opportunities continually flow to the ready and the obedient. This is just nothing more than Matthew 25 and looking at Ezra and Nehemiah. Resources and opportunities continually flow to the ready and obedient. We'll see this in the weeks ahead. It happens throughout the entire story. That every time Ezra and Nehemiah run up against an opportunity that they need resources, it's kind of interesting because it's primarily the pagan world that provides them the resources. It's crazy the way that happens. And we serve the same God who's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And what we need to understand is the reality that when God gifts us with 5 talents, 2 or 1, and we go ahead and let him shape the burden like we talked about, and we go ahead and realize nothing's impossible with God, and we step out on risk, and we trust that he then knows he can trust us with even more resources. And he unlocks resources from the world to meet the needs of a growing kingdom. I was sitting across the table from a gentleman in Houston not long ago, Worldwide Oil Company. And I go, do you realize, I was sharing a personal burden. I said, I don't believe there's another industry in the world that God has set apart with the opportunity to reach the world with the gospel like the oil and gas industry. And I said, my question is, I'm speaking directly to a man that I know is a follower of Jesus. I said, do you understand the magnitude of what that means for you? And I say to all of you, your life, again, let me say it again. This is not a motivational speech. This is not meant for a poster. And this is not meant for you to walk out and go, yeah. This is meant for you to walk out and go, that's weighty. That there is no neutral life, there is no neutral moment. And Ezra and Nehemiah were simply ready to let God do what he does, burden them with what he wants to do, to understand nothing stands in the way of God, and to know that God showers his resources towards his people. And it begins with your simple address, your simple zip code, and I'll say it this way, your simple life that God uses to change generations you may never see. And if I could close it this way, it begins with how you treat the guy at the counter. And I hope you approach counters differently this week. Let's pray together. Father, thanks for just letting us gather together and give individuals and families the courage to go to the prayer room or to come down to the front if they need counsel or prayer. Most of us will just walk out of here and make us deeply, deeply aware of the magnitude of each life you have given us for your purposes, your glory, and our joy. In Jesus' name, amen. Have a great day. Hopefully we'll see you tonight at Elements.